Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph, starting with a new Mishnah on Daf Ayin Vov Amud Beis. The Korban Pesach, we learned if a person individually is Tameh, then he is pushing off his chiyuv to bring the Korban Pesach from Yudalid B'Nisan till 1 month later, Yudalid B'Iyar, Pesach Sheni. However, if the tzibur, either the entire tzibur, even roiv tzibur, is tamei meis, then they do perform the Korban Pesach even on Yudalid B'Nisan. It's doiche es hatuma. The Mishnah now tells us several different Korban tzibur that themselves are doiche tuma, but we'll find a specific difference between those Korban tzibur and the Korban Pesach. Says the Mishnah, Chamisha devarim boim betuma ve'enon necholim betuma. There are 5 things the Mishnah counts that are doiche es hatuma. That means you bring these korbans b'state of tuma, but they're not eaten in their state of tuma. The first one is ha'omer. The omer is the korban that's a mincha offering, which is brought the second day of Pesach, from a flour of sa'ara of barley. That itself is brought from an omer, which is 42 and a little bit more beitzim. From that omer is a kmitza, which is taken and put on the mizbeach. The rest is to be eaten by the kohanim. So over here, if the kohanim are in a state of tuma, they will makriv the korban oila, but they will not eat the rest of that omer offering. The Mishnah goes on to say the second thing. Ushtei alechem. This is the offering that's brought with chita, and this is chametz, brought on the day of Shavuos, and this is brought together with 2 kvasim. After the kvasim's dam is nizrak ala mizbeach, the shtei alechem is then to be eaten by the kohanim. Here, if the kohanim are tamei, they still go ahead. They don't offer up the shtei alechem. That's done with a tnufa together with the korban, but that is performed, and the korbanos are brought, but the shtei alechem is not consumed. It's not eaten by the kohanim. The third, v'lechem haponim. The lechem haponim is the showbreads. There's 12 altogether, and that's placed on Shabbos and then switch from Shabbos to Shabbos. The protocol is that they would put also 2 little spoonfuls of levoina, and they would put those spoonfuls on the mizbeach, after which the kohanim can participate in then eating amongst themselves the lechem haponim. Here, if the kohanim are tamei, they perform by putting the lechem haponim on, and indeed they'll put the levoina on the mizbeach, but they will not eat the lechem haponim. V'zivchei shalmei tzibur. Zivchei shalmei tzibur is the korban that we had mentioned before that's brought on Shavuos together with lechem haponim. There's a tnufa that is done with the lechem haponim, but then the 2 kvasim are offered on the mizbeach on Shavuos, and these are the korban shlomim, which is the only korban shlomim of a tzibur. And again, when the kohanim are tamei, they perform the korban, but they do not eat the korban afterwards. Usiirei Roshei Chadashim. The next in the list is the Siirim of Roshei Chadashim. These are Sirei Chatos, which are, part of it is consumed by the Kohanim, but over here, because the Kohanim are Tamei, they will bring up the korban, Sir Chatos, on Rosh Chodesh, but they will not eat those parts that are normally consumed because they are Tamei. The Mishnah goes on to say, however, in contrast to these korbanos that are korban tzibur, that are doiches ha-tamei, ha-pesach sheba betuma, when the roiv or the tzibur, the entire tzibur is tamei, then we say the korban pesach is also doichet the tuma. That means we bring the korban pesach in a state of tuma. However, it also, unlike the other korbanos, is nechal betuma. It is eaten also betuma. And explains the Mishnah, because the purpose of the korban pesach is ultimately, as the pasuk says, lefi oichloi, it should be eaten. And therefore, over here, although the tzibor is tamei, not only they bring the carbon tamei, they will also eat the carbon tamei at night on Leil Tes Vav. Ask the Gemara right away, Chamisha lemiute mai. Why does the Mishnah count 5? It could just list the various korbanos that are doiches HaShabbos, that are doiches HaTumah. Why does it count 5? It must come to exclude something else. A 6th answers the Gemara, lemiute chagigas chamisha asar, to exclude the carbon chagil, which is brought on the first day of Pesach, but huadin also on Shavuos or on Sukkot. The salka daich I might have thought, you might have thought to say, kivan dit carbon siborhu v'kvialei moyed titchetuma. Since it's both a carbon sibor and it has a fixed time, then it is doiche de tuma. You can bring in a state of tuma. Kamash malon kivan de islei tashlumin kol shiva loidach yeshabes. Since indeed it can be brought the other days, there's tashlumim. If a person does not bring it the first day of Yom Tif, he still has other days to bring it. So therefore, it's not doiches HaShabbos. Umid the Shabbos loidachya tuma. And also, therefore, it's also not doiche the tuma. So therefore, this Mishnah comes to exclude the 6th thing, only 5 and not the 6th, namely the chagiga chamishosar. V'nesni nami shiur harigolim. Ask the Gemara, why didn't the Mishnah teach also the siirei harigolim? The siirei harigolim, which is also brought, which is korban musaf, and the siirim that are brought on the regolim. How come that's not mentioned in our Mishnah as that which is doiche Shabbos? There it's also a korban sibor, it's a musaf, and also it is something that is set with a kviyus zman. Answers the Gemara, hatanile, it's already taught and included in that which it states in the Mishnah, zivche shalmei tzibor. Ihochi frek the Gemara, then sirei rashi chadashim nami lo nisni. You shouldn't teach then the 5th one that was mentioned in our Mishnah of the sirei rosh chodesh, because after all, the hotana zivche shalmei tzibor, it's also included in the zivche shalmei tzibor. So why are we then mentioning that as a separate one on the list in our Mishnah? Answers the Gemara Amre, they said on top of Ayin Zayin Amr Aleph, Siirei Roshei Chadashim Itztrichale. We need to teach in our Mishnah specifically the Siirim of Rosh Chodesh. Why? Because Salke Daite Chamina, you might have thought to say, Haloik Siv Behu Moyed. It doesn't state in the Torah Moyed Gabe Rosh Chodesh. And therefore, Kamash, I might think it's not included in being Doiche then the Tuma like all the other Moyadim. Kamash Malan de Rosh Chodesh Ikri Moyed. But still, Rosh Chodesh is called Moyed. Kide Abaye, like Abaye expounded. The Omar Abaye Tammuz the Hai Shosa Maluye Maliyua. He says that year when the spies were sent out, the month of Tammuz was Mole, was a 30-day month. So therefore, when the spies were sent out at the very end of Chof Tes Sivan, so then you can count 40 days from Chof Tes Sivan till you get to Tisha B'Av. And the night of Tisha B'Av, that's the night that they brought back the terrible report. That night, Klal Yisrael cried, and Hakadosh Baruch Hu said, if you're going to cry, that's going to be a Bechiyah Shel Daros, Chalila. And that's what happened. Tichsiv Kora Alai Moyed Lishbor Bachurai. Says in the Pasuk, Hashem called out and said that it's going to be against me a moyed, which is a reference to Rosh Chodesh, according to Abaye's explanation. Lishbor Bachurai, to break, to crush my Bachurim, as a result of all of the tragedy that took place on Tisha B'Av. The Gemara now points out lememra the kulu moyed osu. All of these things that have a kavius on moyed are doiche tuma and can be brought on the moyed even in a state of tuma. Ask the Gemara, what's the source for this? Menahan nimili. Answers the Gemara, Distanu Rabbanon. It states in the Brisa, Vayidaber Moshe es Moyadei Hashem, and Moshe spoke to Klal Yisrael about the Moyadei Hashem, the appointed times of Hashem. Ma Talmud Leimer, what did he then teach them? Since since we only learned the Korban Tamid and the Korban Pesach, that each one is doiche es hatuma. Shenemar, it says behu b'moyadoi, because the word moyado implies that it's in its fixed time, in its moyed, in its appointed time. B'moyadoi va'afilu b'Shabbos, b'moyadoi va'afilu b'tuma. That moyado comes to teach that it's doiche Shabbos and it's also doiche tuma. And over here it's masha the word moyadoi. Previously we had learned what seems to be a different limud from Psachim, but al kol panim, and we had a gezerah shava moyadoi from Korban Pesach and from the Korban Tamid. Just like it says in Korban Tamid, it says moyado, which is doiches haShabbos. So too Korban Pesach is also doiches Shabbos. Just like by Korban Pesach, it therefore is something that's doiche tuma. So too then Korban Tamid is doiche tuma. Over here it's masha the word moyado alone is what teaches us that each one is doiche Shabbos and doiche tuma. Shar korbanos tzibur minayin. However, that's by Pesach and Korban Tamid. But all other korbanos tzibur, where do we know that in the state of tuma it's doiche the tuma? Shenemar, it says eile ta'asu laHashem b'moyadechem. These you shall do, you shall perform in your moyadim. Minayin l'rabois oimer v'hakarev imoy. How does we know that this includes the korban oimer and the korban that's brought together with it? Shtei alechem v'hakarev imom, and the shtei alechem that together with its korban. Talmud loymar, the Brisa goes on to say, Vayidaber Moshe Madei Hashem el bnei Yisrael hakosuv kova moyed echad lekulon. The Torah comes and koveya a moyed, one for everybody. In other words, when it says moyed, it comes to include even these korbanos as well. V'chohani lama li asked the Gemara. How do we know indeed that all of these are also included? In other words, no. Here the Gemara is asking, V'chohani lama li, why do we need the word moyed in different psukim? Just teach it in one pasuk, telling me that indeed is doiche tuma. Then we'll already know it than all the other ones. Why do I have to then mention moyadim? To teach me. Tzrichi, says the Gemara, we need all of them. Why? Because of Rachmana Tamid. If it only said Moed by Korban Tamid, then I would say Hava Mina Tamid Shekein Tadir V'Kolim. Because Tamid is unique. Because Tamid is unique that it has Tamidus. It's brought in the morning and the afternoon. Tamid Shel Shachar, Tamid Shel Ben Harboim. And also, Tamid is unique that as a Korban Oil, the whole thing goes up. That's why it's Doiche Tuma. So I need to write Tamid over there. Aval Pesach loy, I would not know that Pesach is also doiche tuma. Kamash malan, because of Rachamana Pesach. If it only wrote by Pesach that it's doiche tuma, I would say Pesach shimu onish choris, because Pesach is unique. It's something has something that's unique, that is something that has the punishment of choris. If a person does not bring his korban Pesach, Aval Tamid the ein anush choris emaloi. But I might think, therefore, if I only wrote it by Pesach, I would not know it by korban Tamid as doiche tuma, because it doesn't have that uniqueness in that it is ma'anish a chiyuv koris. Kamash malan, that indeed both of them are doiche tuma. Because of Rachmana Hani Tarti, if it only wrote in the Torah these two places, moye by Tamid and moye by Korban Pesach, that are doiche tuma, hava mina hani hud yesh bohen sad chomer. That's because these two have their chumrah, their stringency. Tamid Tadir V'Kolil, Pesach Shu Onish Koris. Tamid has its uniqueness, as we said, that it's brought up completely. And it's also Tadir, morning and afternoon. Whereas the Korban Pesach has its uniqueness, that carries with it Onish Koris. Aval Shar Korbanos Tzibur, Eimoloi. But all other Korbanos Tzibur, I would say, it's not Doiche Tuma. Therefore, the Torah has to say, these are these things that you are going to do for Hashem during your moyed, the korbanos. Because of if it only wrote this over here, that would say all the korbanos sibur that are bringing a kapara, they are doiche tuma. Aval oimer v'shtei alechem dein boin lechaper el lahatir ba'almaninhu loy. But when it comes to the korban oimer, there is not coming to be a kapara. There it's coming to be matir, the new grain. And also similarly, the shtei alechem is coming to be matir, the new grain for the korban mincha. And therefore, since it only comes to be matir and not be mechaper, it does not doiche tuma. I might have thought. Kamash malan, it also is doiche tuma. Because of Rachmana, and if it only wrote then Oimer and Shtei Alechem alone, that they are doiche tuma, hava mina adarabba. Oimer v'Shtei Alechem de alime de boin lahatir. I would say that they're strong. They have a certain strength. What's unique about the carbon Oimer and the carbon Shtei Alechem? That coming to me matir. They are doiche tuma. Aval hanach loy. But all other things that we had mentioned before, they are not going to be doiche tuma. Kamash malan. Therefore, we need all these things mentioning themselves that they are doiche the tuma. The Gemara now brings the Amoraim, how they understood in the Beis HaMedrash. Savua de lekuli alma. They said everybody holds, meaning the majority opinion, tuma de chuyahi betzibur uboyatzitz leratzos. They're saying that in regard to the tuma that is nidche, what is the status of that tuma? Is it dechuya or is it hutra? What's the nafkamina? One nafkamina is that if you have a situation where rov of the kohanim are themselves tamei, and therefore the korban is doiche the tuma. If it's dechuya, we'd have to then go try to seek out those kohanim that are still tahor. But if it's hutra, then indeed those kohanim that are tmeim, we can go ahead and use them to then offer up the carbon. Another nafkamina is that if it's dechuya, then you need the kapara from the tzitz, that b'di'evid will then make the carbon valid. And that's what the Gemara says now over here. Since the l'kuliyama tuma dechuyahi b'tzibur, that the rove of the opinion is that when it comes to the situation, it's called dechuya, and boy tzitz l'ratzois, and the tzitz is required. The tzitz is the head plate that says Kodesh LaHashem, worn by the Kohen Gadol. That tzitz of the Big Day Kahuna brings a certain kapara, a certain ritzui, to allow the carbon. The leketana, even though it was brought in the state of tuma, the leketana de shames lei, the omar tumas hutra b'tzibur el Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda is a das yachi that says that the tuma b'tzibur is only hutra and not dechuya, and therefore he holds that it's not requiring the tzitz to mechaper. The Tanya, like it says in the following brayso, tzitz bein sheyeshno al mitzchoy bein she'eino al mitzchoy meratze. Div Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says that the tzitz, whether it's on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol or it's not being worn at that moment on the Kohen Gadol, nonetheless it will bring a certain kapara, a ritzui. Those are words of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda oimer oideyu al mitzchoy meratze. So long as it is on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol, then it brings a ritzui. However, if not worn at that time by the Kohen Gadol, it will not bring a ritzui. Omar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon now says to Rabbi Yehuda, Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim yochiach she'ein al mitzchoy umeratze. On Yom Kippurim, the Kohen Gadol goes inside, and when he goes inside, he does not wear the golden vestments. Including those golden vestments is the tzitz. So we see over here, says Rabbi Shimon to Rabbi Yehuda, nonetheless it's meratze, because after all, we say that it's a good korban, even the situation when the tzibur, the kohanim, were in a state of tuma. Omar loi. So Rabbi Yehuda's response was, Hanoch liyom kippurim shetuma hutra b'tzibur. That's because Yom Kippurim is different, because the tuma is hutra b'tzibur. Mechlal, so we can see and derive from here the Rabbi Shimon Sover Tuma Dechuya Hi B'tzibur. So we see that Rabbi Shimon indeed holds that Tuma is Dechuya B'tzibur, and it's only Rabbi Yehuda who's a Das Yochid that the Tuma is Hutra B'tzibur. The Gemara says Dukuli Alma Ein Hatzitz Meratze Al Achilos. That's Gabe the din that we said before in regards to Dechuya and Hutra. And again, the Amoraim said that most of the opinion, almost everybody holds that it's dechuya except Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara now says that the Amoraim went on to say, "Dekuli alme ein hatzitz meratze al achilosai." That means to say that the Amoraim said that also the unanimous opinion is that the tzitz is not meratze al achilos, al achilos. Dahainu, that the carbon that is brought, and even that part that is supposed to be consumed, which is tamei. So, according to this opinion, the majority, he says, unanimous opinion, will say that this is indeed not going to be meratze. It's not going to be meratze on this. However, there's a das yachid. We'll soon see Rabbi Eliezer that says it is meratze. We need to say not that you can go ahead and eat it. It's not meratze that you can go ahead and consume it, but it's meratze in the sense that it will not hold back the avodah of the korban. As follows: the lekatan the shamas lay the omar tzis meratze al achilos el Rabbi Eliezer. He's a das yachid who holds that it is meratze al achilos. The Tanya, for it says in the Bryce, Rabbi Eliezer oimer hatzitz meratze al achilos. Rabbi Yosi oimer ein hatzitz meratze al achilos. But the unanimous opinion that follows Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Eliezer is only a das yachid, according to Rabbi Yosi and everybody else. However, it is not meratze al achilos.